It was 11:51 p.m. My apartment in Boston was quiet, the kind of expensive, minimalist, quiet you pay a premium for in Beacon Hill. I was reviewing the quarterly projections for my biotech firm, the blue light of the monitor the only warmth in the room. My phone buzzed on the mahogany desk. One notification, one name I hadn't seen on a screen in 20 years. Susan Hawthorne. I didn't flinch. My heart rate didn't spike. I simply picked up the device and read the message. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a question. It was a directive. We need you back. The gala is next week. Bring the boy. I stared at the screen. The boy. The grandson they believed existed because of a rumor they hadn't bothered to verify. The audacity was breathtaking. After 2 decades of silence, of erasing me from family portraits and public records, they thought a text message was enough to summon me. They assumed I was still the 16-year-old girl they could discard and retrieve at their convenience. I set the phone down. I didn't reply. My pulse remained steady. Emotion was a variable I had learned to exclude from the equation years ago. I opened my calendar and checked the date of the Hawthorne Foundation Gala. Then I went back to my projections. This wasn't a family reunion. This was leverage. And for the first time in my life, I held all of it. Before we dive in, drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever had someone who ghosted you suddenly reappear when they needed something? How did you handle it? Beacon Hill, 2004. The rain in Boston that November was relentless, a freezing sheet of water that soaked through wool coats and good intentions alike. I was 16. I was pregnant, and I was standing in the foyer of the Hawthorne family brownstone, waiting for my parents to decide my fate. William Hawthorne was pacing, a phone pressed to his ear, discussing polling numbers for the upcoming senatorial primary. My mother, Susan, was arranging flowers in a crystal vase, her back to me. They treated my pregnancy not as a life-altering event, but as a public relations crisis, a complication in the campaign narrative that needed to be spun or deleted. "We can't have this," my father said, finally hanging up. He didn't look at me. He looked through me to the wall behind my head. "The voters won't understand. The opposition will use it. You have to go." They packed my suitcase for me. One suitcase. That was the limit of my worth in their world. Before they opened the door, my mother handed me a stack of papers, a non-disclosure agreement, a document relinquishing all future claims to the family trust, a legal erasure of my existence as a Hawthorne. "Sign it," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "It's for the best, for everyone." I signed. I didn't waste breath on an argument. I didn't debase myself with a plea. I walked out into the rain, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind me with a finality that echoed in my bones. I walked 3 miles to Mrs. Catherine's house, our former nanny, the only person who had ever looked at me with kindness. She opened the door, took one look at my shivering form, and pulled me inside. I kept those papers. For 20 years, I kept the signed non-disclosure agreement and the voided trust documents in a fireproof box beneath my bed. I didn't keep them for revenge, not at first. I kept them because in a life where my own parents had gaslighted me into believing I was the problem, those papers were the only proof I had that I existed. They were the tangible evidence of their cruelty, an anchor to reality when the world tried to tell me I was crazy for remembering the coldness of that night. They were my receipts, and now they were ammunition. I didn't just survive Mrs. Catherine's attic, I built an empire from it. I sold the sedan my parents had given me for my 16th birthday for $14,400. That was my seed money. I didn't spend it on rent or clothes. I invested it in myself. I worked nights, studied days, and when I was 22, I pitched a biotech startup idea to an angel investor who saw something in my eyes, a hunger that couldn't be taught. He gave me $60,000. 10 years later, my company was valued in the millions. I moved back to Boston, not to be near them, but because this was my city too. I raised Emma alone. I taught her that independence wasn't a preference, it was a necessity. She grew up watching me negotiate contracts, stare down boardrooms, and turn no into a profit margin. Now, at 19, she was pre-law at Harvard, sharper than I ever was at her age. We were a closed circuit, Emma and I. We didn't need the Hawthorne name or their political connections. My success was the ultimate retaliation. Every magazine cover, every industry award, every dollar I earned was a silent indictment of their belief that I was nothing without them. I had become a ghost they couldn't exorcise, haunting the same city streets, breathing the same rarefied air, but completely untouchable. They didn't know I was back until they needed me, and when they finally reached out, it wasn't because they missed their daughter, it was because they had run out of other options. They ambushed me at my office. It was a Tuesday morning, typically reserved for high-level strategy meetings, but my assistant buzzed me, her voice tight. "Megan, there are 2 people here. They say they're your parents. They won't leave." I told her to let them in. I wanted to see them on my turf, surrounded by the glass and steel reality of my success. William and Susan Hawthorne walked in, looking smaller than I remembered. Age hadn't softened them, it had just made their sharp edges more brittle. They looked around my office, not with pride, but with a desperate calculating appraisal. "Megan," my mother began, smoothing her skirt, "we didn't want to come here, but you haven't been answering." "State your business," I said, not offering them a seat. My father cleared his throat. "We're in a bit of a bind. We told a certain donor that we had a grandson, a male heir. It was necessary to secure a significant contribution for the foundation. A legacy gift. The Kingmaker," I said. Everyone in Boston politics knew him, an old money conservative who believed dynasties were built on bloodlines. "He wants to meet the boy at the gala," my mother said, her voice rising in pitch. "We need you to bring him, just for the evening. A few photos, a handshake. We're prepared to compensate you." My father placed a check on my desk, $300,000. "Rent a child actor if you have to," he said, as if suggesting a catering menu. "Or maybe Emma can cut her hair, wear a suit. It doesn't matter. We just need a body." I looked at the check. It was more money than they had ever spent on me in 16 years. It was a bribe to help them lie to a donor, to help them maintain the facade that they were a wholesome, traditional family. They weren't asking for forgiveness. They were trying to hire me as a co-conspirator. "No," I said. "Megan, be reasonable," my mother pleaded. "This money could help you. Your little company..." My company generated $5.5 million in revenue last year. I interrupted, my voice flat. "I don't need your money, and I don't rent out my integrity." I slid the check back across the desk. They left angry, muttering about ingratitude, convinced I was just holding out for a better offer. They didn't realize I had just taken something far more valuable than their money. I had taken their confession. And now I knew exactly where to look. I drove straight home. Emma was waiting in the living room, surrounded by open casebooks. "How did it go?" she asked, not looking up. "They offered me $300,000 to rent you out as a boy," I said, pouring myself a glass of water. Emma looked up then, her eyes sharp. "That's weird." "It's insulting," I corrected. "No, it's legally weird," she said, closing her laptop. "Why is this donor so obsessed with a grandson? Donors care about policy, influence, maybe a photo op. They don't care about the gender of a grandchild unless..." She trailed off, her mind working faster than mine. "Unless the money is tied to a specific beneficiary." We spent the night digging. Emma used her university access to pull public campaign finance records. I called in a favor from a forensic accountant I'd used during my startup phase. We looked for the donor, the Kingmaker, and cross-referenced his contributions with the Hawthorne Foundation's public filings. At 3 a.m., Emma found it. "Mom, look at this." She turned her laptop toward me. It was a trust registry search. There was a trust fund established 15 years ago. The beneficiary was listed as William Hawthorne III, my imaginary son. "They didn't just lie," Emma whispered. "They created a person." We followed the paper trail. The trust had received regular deposits from campaign accounts labeled as consulting fees or vendor payments, but the withdrawals were personal. Renovations on the brownstone, European vacations. A new boat. They had been using my fake son as a money laundering vessel. They were funneling campaign donations into a trust for a non-existent heir to evade taxes and campaign finance laws. The gala wasn't just about saving face. It was a cover-up. The donor was likely coming to check on his investment, or perhaps he was part of the scheme and needed the optics to look clean. If they didn't produce the boy, the IRS and the FEC would start asking questions they couldn't answer. My parents weren't just cruel, they were criminals, and I held the smoking gun. The Hawthorne Foundation Gala was held in the grand ballroom of the Copley Plaza Hotel. Crystal chandeliers, black ties, and enough old money to buy a small country. We didn't sneak in through the kitchen. We walked through the front doors. I wore red. Not a polite, demure red, but a blood red gown that clung to every curve and demanded attention. Emma was beside me in a sharp, tailored tuxedo suit, looking every inch the legal shark she was becoming. We were the only two people in the room not wearing black or navy. We were a wound in their perfect picture. My parents spotted us immediately. Relief washed over their faces, a visible, physical sag. They thought I had taken the deal. They thought I was there to play my part. Susan rushed over, her smile tight and brittle. Thank God. You're late. The donor is asking. Come, we have a private room set up in the back. No, I said. Before she could grab my arm, I walked past her. I walked straight to the stage where the microphone stood waiting for the keynote speech. The room went quiet. The clinking of silverware stopped. The murmurs died down. All eyes were on the woman in the red dress. I looked down at William and Susan. They were frozen near the entrance, their faces pale masks of terror. And in that moment, looking at them from the height of the stage, I realized something. They weren't powerful. They were hollow. Without this room's approval, without the donor's money, without the lies that propped them up, they were nothing. They were empty wallets pretending to be vault. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to be angry. I just needed to be precise. Good evening, I said, my voice echoing through the silent hall. My name is Megan Hawthorne, and I have a story to tell you about a boy named William Hawthorne III. I clicked a remote. The screen behind me lit up. It wasn't a photo of a happy child. It was a bank ledger. This is the trust fund of the grandson my parents promised you. As you can see, he has been very active. He's paid for a new roof on the Beacon Hill brownstone. He's funded 3 trips to the Amalfi Coast. He's even bought a vintage sailboat. I paused, letting the numbers sink in. The only problem is William Hawthorne III doesn't exist. He is a ghost created to hide stolen campaign funds. And the only grandchild in this room, I pointed to Emma, who stood tall near the stage, is the one they tried to erase 20 years ago. The room didn't gasp, it didn't scream, it imploded. The aftermath wasn't loud, there were no screaming matches or thrown glasses. When you destroy a facade that old and that expensive, it doesn't explode, it disintegrates. The kingmaker stood up first. He was a man who had made senators and broken governors, and he looked at my parents with a quiet, terrifying disgust. He didn't look at the screen. He didn't look at me. He looked at William Hawthorne. You have no honor, he said. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried to every corner of the silent ballroom. And you have wasted my time. He turned and walked out. The sound of his footsteps on the marble floor was the death knell of the Hawthorne political machine. Following him, the other donors, the power brokers, the socialites began to move. They didn't make eye contact with my parents. They simply flowed toward the exits like water draining from a broken vessel. My parents stood alone near the stage. They looked small. They looked like what they were, 2 people who had traded their humanity for a legacy that just walked out the door. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel glee. I felt a profound, settling silence. The debt was paid. Come on, Emma said, touching my arm. We're done here. We walked out into the cool Boston night. The air smelled of rain and exhaust, but to me, it smelled like oxygen. We got into the back of the town car. Emma leaned her head back against the seat, loosening her tie. She paused, searching for the word efficient. It was necessary, I said. I looked out the window as the city blurred past. I thought about the $300,000 check they had tried to bribe me with. I thought about the $4.5 million sitting in that fraudulent trust fund, money that would now likely be seized by the authorities or frozen in litigation. Mom, Emma said softly, what happens to them? Indictments, I said. Tax fraud, embezzlement, campaign finance violations. They won't go to prison for abandoning me, Emma. The law doesn't care about bad parenting, but it cares very much about stolen money. And us? She asked. Us? I turned to look at her. We build. This was the part I had been planning since I saw the check on my desk. Destruction is easy. Anyone can strike a match. But true revenge, the kind that lasts, isn't about burning their house down. It's about building a better one they can't enter. I'm starting a foundation, I told her. The Catherine Fund, named after the woman who opened her door when no one else would. For who? For girls like I was. Teen mothers who are kicked out, erased, and told they have no future. We're going to provide housing, legal aid, and tuition. We're going to make sure that the next time a girl is standing in the rain with a suitcase, she knows exactly where to go. I wasn't just going to be the woman who destroyed the Hawthorns. I was going to be the woman who saved everyone they tried to throw away. I would use my resources, my influence, and my anger to plant seeds in the scorched earth they left behind. That was the ultimate justice. They wanted a legacy of power? Fine. I would build a legacy of survival. We crossed the bridge over the Charles River, the city lights reflecting on the water. I took my daughter's hand. The ghost of Beacon Hill was gone. I was finally, completely real. The best revenge isn't burning their house down, it's building a better one they can't enter. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to know they are strong enough to walk away.